You know, we live in a state that used to be one of the top states in the country. Ohio was a leader among the states about 100 years ago. So not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And we were the land of presidents. If you remember, we had 8 presidents from our founding through 1923. Warren Harding was our last president, died in office. We had 8 presidents. Since then, we've had 0. The closest we've gotten to the presidency for Ohio really was John Bricker back in the 40s. John Kasich's short-lived attempt back in 2000 in the primary, and then Dennis Kucinich's twice attempts to... That's as close as we've gotten since then. If you look at the last 9 presidents in America, 7 of 9 have come from the south and west of the United States. And you'll hear me talk about that a lot throughout the book and even tonight, about the locus of power in America has moved from the northern states to the south and west of America, and not just for presidents anymore. We used to be a state of titans innovation. 100 years ago, the top companies, not just in America, but in the world, were Ohio companies. John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, Procter & Gamble, NCR, Delco, you know, the glass bowl up in Toledo, the rubber industry over in Akron, Canton. We were where things happened. Today, that's not the case anymore. The top companies and the top CEOs, the folks we all recognize by name, all live in places like Texas, California, Colorado, Florida, and elsewhere. The companies there are the ones that are driving innovation. Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, Bill Gates, you know all the names and the companies that drive innovation in America. And we used to be a state where we were an economic powerhouse. In 1911, when my grandfather was born in North Dayton, that was the 3rd generation in my family born in Dayton, the net average income in Ohio was 9.7% above the national average. So we were richer than most of the other states. Today, 2 years ago when my son was born as the 7th generation, Ohio is now 9.4% below the national average. So we become a poor state compared to the other states. So why did that happen? Well, let me walk through a few reasons why. One, I think our political system is not working for Ohio. You say, what does that mean? I mean, our political system isn't working for Ohio. What I would say to you is that despite having won for most of the last 2 decades, one meaning we've gotten conservatives and/or Republicans elected, taxes have gone up, so we have the 18th highest total tax burden in America. Spending has gone up over the last 22 years, 1990 through the 2013 budget, so through John Kasich's 2-year budget he passed. The general revenue fund expenditures will have gone up 148% in Ohio. You adjust for inflation, 44% greater than inflation, averaging about 2% more than inflation every single year in Ohio. And that occurred when, by and large, population was static. We had a lowering of the unemployment rate, a lowering of the poverty rate. So the things that drive government spending, more people need services. You have tons of people moved into the state, so you got to build more roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, all the kind of service. That wasn't happening here. It's happening in Arizona, Texas, and Colorado, but not in Ohio. Yet our spending went up and up and up. And our job market was anemic. In the 1990s, when we were booming as a country, Ohio added jobs, and we will always add jobs when everybody else adds jobs. But our job growth was the 38th best in the country. So we added jobs, but we did it at a very slow pace compared to the other states. In the aughts, the last decade, the lost decade, however you want to refer to it, we lost more jobs in every single state except for Michigan. Every single state but Michigan. So we had the worst jobs economy in the country. And over the last 2.5 years, so from 2010 forward, we're at the 24th best jobs economy. I know sometimes you hear the governor talk about the 7th best, the 3rd best, the 5th best. It's a little bit misleading. He's using raw numbers. So the sheer number of jobs, we've created 100,000 jobs in Ohio. That sounds great, but we're the 7th largest state. We're going to always create more jobs than Maine, Vermont, Delaware. So the better number to use is a percent growth number, because that kind of normalizes between the really big states and the really small states. Anybody see the Dispatch on Monday? You see the big front page article about the jobs and governors and which governors, Republican or Democrat, are doing a better job? Anybody see that? Did you see the charts in the second page? That is a classic example of lazy journalism. Joe Varden did a terrible job for readers, because what he did was essentially use raw numbers. And if you look at the top 10 states with the best job growth, including California, we all know how California's doing. They were the top 11 states minus Illinois. Illinois is dying. So Illinois is the fourth largest state, but they had dropped below the top 10. So the top 10 states were of the top 11 states, i.e. the biggest states in the country. So they're going to create net jobs more than everybody else. If you would have done it in an intellectually honest way, you would have seen that that is a very different makeup. Okay, Ohio wouldn't be in the top 10, would be in the, it's essentially 24th. So you really have to be careful how you do this, because otherwise you're misleading your Ohioans. The other problem is we have a tendency to focus on the wrong problems in Ohio. What do I mean by that? 1983, Dick Celeste, Democrats controlled the legislature, and what do? They jam through collective bargaining for government workers. That single biggest move is what they did. That's what his legacy is. There's no, nobody remembers Dick Celeste for anything other than that. And all that did was essentially begin the cost problem that has driven local taxes higher and higher in Ohio, because it's the only way you can sustain those government compensation packages that are growing greater than inflation year after year after year. And you add in salary increases, step increases, longevity pay increases, health care, pension pickups, you name it. It all adds up to a whole lot more, mostly well beyond 5% per year growth. So that's one. Ted Strickland came into office, and what did he do? He put all of our economic aids in the green energy basket. And he wasn't alone in this. I think, Mary's writing a new paper on energy that we'll put out in a few weeks. And what she talks about is, and I think it was Kevin who was here earlier talking about the energy and coal in Ohio. It was Republicans in the House under John Husted that jammed through a renewable requirement for Ohio's energy companies. So that was the beginning of hurting our coal companies and our gas companies, was requiring renewables. Why are we doing that? That's our guys doing it. It makes no sense, right? But Strickland did more and more of this: windmills, biomass, solar energy. And as we know, that stuff's all collapsed. Spain's collapsed, Germany's collapsed, China's collapsed. So there's really no market there. It's too expensive. And with now the glut of natural gas, there's no way alternative energy can compete with essentially coal and gas. But it's not just those folks. More recently, I will say to you, Governor Kasich, in his urge to try to get a small tax cut for re-election, trying to leverage a severance tax on Ohio's nascent and rebooming energy sector out in Utica Shale, is an enormous waste of time and energy. And let me tell you why. One, it is not the conservative fiscal policy for us to essentially tax that group so that we can give tax breaks to everybody else. We don't do that. The other side does that. We do not. But even when you do look at the numbers, his projections are grossly, grossly off. They're so far off, in fact, the Washington Post had a story where they said it is a gross exaggeration when he's claiming $1 trillion a year in oil and gas production. If you add all of the oil produced in the entire country over the next 5 years, it will equal about 800 million. And he's claiming that we're going to do $1 trillion a year in Ohio. It just doesn't exist. There's not that kind of stuff here. It just isn't. More importantly, when you look at the numbers of how you're going to get $500 million out of those companies that then lead to the $46 average tax cut for everybody else, assume about $5 million per well cost. So it's going to cost our energy entrepreneurs $5 million to get into the ground. The projections say $75 million in production. So $5 million oil companies and small energy entrepreneurs, so they can pay off their costs and they start paying the severance tax. There's $70 million of tax coming in, right, that they're going to build tax. Problem with that is the field tests are coming back showing something drastically different. It's costing about $10 million per well to actually drill, and the production is closer to about $20 million. And so what does that mean? It means, one, it's going to take a lot longer for those companies to essentially pay off, get production that pays off the cost. And by the time that happens, it won't be in a year or two, it'll be 3, 4, 5 years from now. And it won't be $46 on average, it's going to be closer to about 10 or 15 bucks. So we're spending enormous amounts of capital fighting amongst ourselves, by the way, over a small little tax cut based upon putting on the backs of our energy entrepreneurs and making us less competitive with the rest of the country. And I understand that the government wants to say that we're going to still be lower than everybody else, but I know Milton Friedman and Ronald Reagan were very good, and what they said was, you don't get more of something when you tax it higher. So I don't care if we're going to be still lower than the other guy. And that's only on one little snapshot. That doesn't account the CAT tax they still have to pay, and the income tax, and all the other things. Bottom line is, it's not a good idea. Let's focus on broad tax reform, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we focus on the wrong problems. We've got a group of journalists that I call ginos. Ginos. Journalists in name only. They do a terrible job of giving Ohioans a fair shape of what's going on in the world. They will produce and report on every single liberal progressive report or study that gets pushed out by every union-funded think tank you can imagine. And they did this with Senate Bill 5. And remember the Rutgers study? Rutgers? It wasn't Rutgers. It was a union-funded think tank out of Washington, and a guy that works for a union-funded think tank out of Washington, who also was a professor at Rutgers. But by reporting it as a Rutgers study, it made it sound far more serious and credible than if they would have said a union-funded think tank out of Washington. Right? And at the same time, they don't report anything that's coming out of the conservative think tanks. Buckeye Institute issued 10 reports during my tenure. 10 reports on the biggest issues. Grand Bargain laid the foundation for collective bargaining reform. Smart on crime got passed in criminal justice legislation under the governor. The governor's now adopted our tax expenditure reform that he's going to now push, is what we understand. But report after report driving the issues, pension reform, Medicaid reform, you name it. The 6 newspapers didn't write a single news story on any of those reports. Not a one. Of all the website stuff we did that they'll talk about, the various tools on there, tons and tons of tools, and those of you who've been to the website seen 32 million pieces of data on government salary. Only 2 stories out of all that stuff ever were written about, both in the Dayton Daily News, and that's it. So when you think about how this impacts Ohio, how do we expect Ohioans on things like issue 2 to make educated, good decisions when they don't even realize there are all these things out there that would have educated them, so they could have said, well, how much is the average Dublin school teacher making? Or how much is the Columbus firefighter or police officer making? And they can say, oh my lord, I didn't realize it was that much. Well, they didn't know, and we're fighting against that 30-year narrative of the underpaid government worker. Right, which used to be the case. My dad was a teacher in 1971, left because he couldn't feed a family of 6 on a teacher's salary. Those days are over. Those days are over. You can easily feed a family of 6 on a teacher's salary now. So what does this all mean? We get hits with this stuff over and over again. And we're going to see this here in November in a couple of different places. I know Westerville, I believe Worthington, right, Mark? You guys have a levy on the ballot. Dublin's going to have a levy on the ballot for the schools. And this local property tax assault is something we just can't possibly, well, Westerville has the repeal, right? We just can't possibly fight this as taxpayers. And what do I mean by that, right? You know what happens. You know, we failed the last levy in November here in Dublin. Barely, first time in over a decade. So what are they going to do? They're going to get back at it, but they spent the last year doing what I call the emotional blackmail. Oh, we made the tough decisions. What they did is those Washington, D.C. cuts, right? Future spending that's less than what it was going to be is considered a cut. It's not really a cut. Spending still goes up. Or teachers have retired and they didn't fill the vacancy, that's considered a cut. Right? We've not seen any base pay reductions. We've not seen any real belt tightening. So they'll come to us, ask for more money, and maybe we fail it again this time. And then they'll start hitting us with the stuff that Westerville saw and Hilliard saw, where they just beat you over the head with, we're going to cut football, with sports you have to pay, or we're going to cut music and art, or we're going to have classrooms of 35, and that sends every Dublin parent into the stratosphere because our kids can't possibly learn in a classroom of 35, and then all of us probably did, somehow, some way. But, you know, we live in Dublin now, and we have a different framework of things, same with Westerville, they're in other places. And so, those things happen. Well, that's not just the only thing that people do. Do you know who funded that levy campaign last year here in Dublin? Anybody? Hazard a guess.
Teachers union.
That's what everybody says. It wasn't the teachers union. They gave a little bit of money. It wasn't the teachers union. It wasn't taxpayers. Nope. It was vendors in the school district. The lunch providers, the textbook providers, the technology providers. 72% of the money raised by the Dublin Good Schools Committee last year, 72% came from vendors who received $12 million from Dublin City Schools in the prior year. They will write those $5,000 to $10,000 checks again and again and again because they need that pipeline of money coming in to make sure that they get paid. You guys, we can't come up with enough money to fight that kind of constant battle against these folks. I had somebody just tweet the other day that I think people go, oh, Matt just makes these things up. But they said, oh, I read the book, and I went to the Lucas County Board of Elections to see the city, Toledo public schools. And my God, he was dead right. You go to the Board of Elections, you get the campaign reports, and you start adding it all up. She's like, most of the money came from vendors. And that's happening in school district after school district after school district. Vendors are paying for you guys to have higher property taxes. They don't pay him. You know, I didn't put this in the book because I was trying to be charitable. I actually was in the book, but when he said he was going to resign, I figured, oh, I shouldn't pick on Axner. But you know, he's not even a homeowner in Dublin. He rents. He rents. He's not even paying taxes that he wants to jack up on the rest of us. I left it out of the book because I figured it'd be mean to pick on him. So property tax law, you can't do that. Let's talk about another issue that you deal with. So you know, we always think, where are the base pay reductions? Why don't you ever see base pay reductions? And from either, I think there were 4 last year that I know of, right? The best case you can hope for is a freeze in one of the 3 compensation elements. Freeze in salary, freeze step, freeze longevity, one of the 3, or you rarely get all 3. You might get one, but you rarely get all 3. Why don't you ever see base pay reductions? It happens in the private sector all the time. Well, let's walk through the math on why you don't see base pay reductions. Ready? The OEA due from every teacher is $479 a year. That number is calculated on the average teacher pay in Ohio, which is about $63,000. Okay? $479, $63,000. If the statewide average drops just $1,000 to $62,000, OEA would lose $780,000 in dues money. Do the math. You would have to lose 1,600 teachers, 780,000 divided by 479. You'd have to lose 1,600 teachers in a year for them to say it is better to reduce base pay compensation than it is to simply let 3 or 4 teachers go. Which is why you always see 3 or 4 teachers get shown the door, even though they may be great teachers, because they would rather keep that base average high, because that's in their financial interest to do so, than to keep those teachers and say, you know what, let's all share the burden, see our costs come down, but that way we keep every teacher employed. Because they lose a ton of money for every drop in that average pay. So that's a system that you guys, we cannot compete with. We cannot compete with that kind of lucrative system. The other issue we get hit with in Ohio, and I talked about this a little bit when I talked about the economic powerhouse, is we are a unionized state. We are one of the most pro-union states in the country, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. And if you don't believe me, wonder why you have not read it all in the last, I don't know, probably 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 years. $1 billion, 2,000 worker plant being built in Ohio. We've had expansions at Timken and at Honda because they built so much here already, it's counterintuitive, they lose money if they were to push that, but they did build plants elsewhere. They built in Indiana and other places. And you know, there was this period of time in the spring, in 1 week in the Wall Street Journal, in 1 week, South Carolina got a new $1 billion plant out of Bridgestone. Remember Bridgestone? $1 billion plant by Continental Tire. $1 billion plant from Mexico by Otis Elevator. Since then, it's $800 million plant by Michelin, fine French company. They love unions, just not in America, right? They've got the Boeing 787 Dreamliner plant. Ohio used to be #1 in tires. We're now #11. South Carolina's #2. Oklahoma's #1. They're going to be #1 within 3 years. You know, Airbus just announced a new plant in Mississippi. We never are in the running for this, because you would have to be crazy to put that kind of plant in this state, given our regulatory burden, our tax burden, and our unionization. You would be crazy. And in fact, the head of Michelin, when he announced that plant in South Carolina, in the Wall Street Journal, he literally said, you know, there's really no cost difference between our plants in the north and the one down here. It's the darn rule books that drive us crazy. Right? It's that we have no flexibility in the workplace, and it's the unions that essentially say, no, you can't reassign me, you can't ask me to pick up a broom and help out. And even in Ohio, you saw that in the last 2 years because of the recession, as well as the tsunami in Japan. Honda, right, had massive parts problems. Didn't lay off a single worker in Marysville or East Liberty, not a single worker. Lordstown shut down everything, right? Laid off lots of folks. Not Honda. Not Honda, because they could do the reassignments. And not only that, you know what Honda did? They said, tell you what, we don't have 40 hours worth of work, right? Nobody knows this, because Honda doesn't promote this stuff. We don't have 40 hours worth of work, we only have 25. Spend the next 15 and pick a charity of your choice in the community and go volunteer and we'll pay you for it. That's the kind of stuff that happens when you have flexibility. And we in Ohio face this enormous burden of trying to compete against the South and the West and the US. Forget about China and India. We'll never compete on low-cost labor. Just won't happen. But we can't even compete in this country against those companies that are popping up all over Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We can't even compete with those folks. And so I know a lot of our politicians don't want to touch workplace freedom. But I'll say to you, if you don't touch workplace freedom, and that means a long, strong education campaign to make sure Ohioans understand it, unlike SB5, which didn't have any education behind it, right? To get the business community engaged, and you're going to have to raise a whole lot of money, because we know the unions put in $42 million on public sector, they're going to put a whole lot more on private sector, right? So it's a battle we've got to have if the state's going to be competitive. And don't get me wrong, we will add jobs, just like we did in the 90s. But you watch, over the course of a decade, I know we love to do the snapshots. Oh, look, we had more jobs here than anybody else, raw numbers, last month. Wasn't that great? Watch for the long march of the decade. When you do the algorithms, when you take the growth history of the last 22 years, throughout the top and the bottom years, play with a couple other things, we will probably not get back to our peak private sector employment in Ohio of 4.85 million, which would happen in March of 2000. We probably will not hit that number again until November of 2021. So a child born in that peak year in March will be in their second or third year in college before Ohio gets back to where we were. And you think we're going to keep our best and brightest here with lots of job opportunities and growth? Not if we have a pro-union environment where we're not getting those great opportunities, those great new businesses, and Ohio's not seen as a place that we can really do business. Even on the regulatory front, there's been some good work done by Mary Jo at CSI. Good work, but not enough. We've actually added regulation in the last year and a half. We've added regulatory bodies in the last year and a half. We've not gotten rid of a single one, but we've added more. You know, one of the things I said when I had looked at the governor's budget last year, I said, couldn't you just get rid of one in your budget? Just one? Just one? Throw us a bone? Signal that you're going to get rid of some of this regulation? And we didn't even get one. But we've added now, I think, 2 or 3 new regulatory entities since then. You know, and that doesn't help. I travel around the state, 16,000 miles in county. Been to most of the counties, not all of them, and probably 16,000 people. And I sat down with business owners in all the counties, lots of the counties, big, little, you name it. And what they say to me time and time again is, Matt, we got a whole lot of scorekeepers in Ohio. I said, what do you mean scorekeepers? Well, I've got to hire a lawyer for this, and an accountant for that, a tax guy for this. I've got to have my building code guy, consultant for that. All this to deal with the state regulatory stuff, the federal regulatory stuff. I said, I'm paying all these people that keep score, and not one of them are producing a thing for me. Well, if we don't make that easier on our business owners, they're going to do what Continental Plastic did up in Toledo. Remember Continental Plastic? 2 years ago, right before the election, they had that plant that said, well, you know, Ohio has this rule that Indiana doesn't. So we're going to pop across the state line, and they did. So Indiana added a company that wasn't an Ohio company, all because of a regulatory issue. If you think a company's going to pull up stakes on a regulatory issue, but they won't because of a unionization issue, please come see me. I've got lots of books I can sell you, even though they're free, right? So some key reforms, right? Doom and gloom, but there's some good things. We can get some stuff done in the state if we make some tough choices. Number one, workplace freedom. Gotta get that. Gotta get that on the ballot. Let Ohioans choose. If Ohioans choose poorly, then the rest of us can do what we think we need to do that's best for our future and our families. But let's have the vote. Let's have the fight with big labor. Scott Walker won the fight. We should be able to win it. It's a winnable fight if done right. SB5 is a case study in how to do it wrong. There's an entire chapter in the book on it. I walked through it extensively. One of the key issues is Senator Jones, God bless her soul, dropped that bill and apparently thought because we had the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, that's all that needed to happen. Didn't realize there was a thing called veto referendum, even though 2 years before payday lending there was a veto referendum. There's no strategic plan in place to deal with the veto referendum. And that is, so we lost before we even started. And the book can go into detail about that. So one, workplace freedom. Two, we've got to change the political system in the state. We've got to get a system that empowers you guys and not political parties and the politicians. So how is that? One, we got to go to competitive districts. I'm not saying I'm a fan of this voter first thingamajig that the Democrats and unions have put on, but I got to tell you, it is better than the status quo. The status quo, where a bunch of party bosses sit in a hotel room and draw these whacked out lines so that we have all these safe seats. Safe seats may be good in the short term for the party, but in the long term, it drives down accountability for the people. Because the moment those politicians know they're safe, they don't ever care what you think. And what proof of that is? You want to show proof of that? Mike Duffy's here because his district's not safe. Jim Hughes never comes here because his district's as safe as it can be. Pat T-Berry's never showing up in this place because his district's as safe as it can be. When they're not safe districts, politicians actually show up and you have accountability for them. So we got to get competitive districts. I'm not saying this union thing is the answer, but the status quo is not the answer. If we can't offer something other than the status quo, we will lose in November. I know you've been working, Mike, on this issue. You're part of the team of 8, right? But we got to get something better than a bunch of union guys trying to jam it over. I mean, I've been around now. Every time before I spoke, except tonight, one of the voter first, our guys comes up and says why you should vote against it. And I got to tell you, I'm sitting there going, buddy, you're actually making a case for it. Because it's hard to say a system where it's essentially 12 Ohioans who aren't a bunch of political hacks, aren't part of the system, get to draw a district that drives competition. That doesn't sound bad, does it? Devil in the details, that may be the bads. The problem is, we just say the status quo works. Ohioans don't like the status quo. We got to do something else. 2, we've got to get to a system that is a caucus assembly primary system where the parties have got to be neutral through the primary. We don't need party bosses giving endorsements and money to make sure that their guy or gal jams through the primary. That does nothing for we the people. We need a system where caucus, you go to the caucus, try to get in that assembly system. If you're a delegate to assembly, the delegates are the ones who choose who's on the primary ballot. And that way, the candidates, all of us, essentially go to those delegates and say, here's why you should vote for me. And you don't need money to do that. So it takes money out of the system for a while so that anybody, even a brother, can actually compete in this system, can try to say, I might be the right person. Give me a chance to make my case. And then when the primary happens, the parties have to stay neutral. It's two people fighting it out. As iron man strengthens man, right? Don't we like competition in our party? I thought we did. So let's have competition. Let's get the parties off. Let them focus on the general election. Keep them out of the primary system. Keep out of the primary system. And then we need to have a PAC in this state that supports conservatives. Because, as I learned, even when you have neutrality, which they have in Colorado, even when you have a caucus assembly primary system, which they have in Colorado, the establishment does its way to try to make sure their folks get funding or they stop you from getting funding. And so you've got to have a system of PAC, like Jim DeMint Senate Conservatives PAC, a PAC here that funds conservatives through primary, through general, and if they win, says to them, don't worry about when you get to Columbus and they say to you, Mike, if you don't vote the way we want you to vote, we're not going to fund your re-election. You say, we'll take care of you, don't you worry. And then you'll start getting more and more conservatives who have spine, who stand up to the structure, establishment, and special interest, and we get better results, hopefully, for we the people. Duffy knows this. He spends his time in the legislature. We got the first session, we got the second session. Second session needs to go away. We don't need 2 sessions of legislators doing more laws. It's the last thing we need on it. You know what we need? We need folks like Duffy doing oversight, digging into the bowels of government aggressively, sunset reviews, oversight committees that look at every single program, every single dollar that's spent, brings in those program managers, brings in those bureaucrats, says, hey, we passed this thing 30 years ago. Does it still make sense to have it? Is it cost effective? Is it getting outcomes that make sense? None of that really happens today. We need to put that on steroids and have that second session be all about oversight and sunsetting. And focus first session on, if you can't get your bill through in those first 5 months, tough. Wait for 2 years from now. You know, I mean, if you all remember the Clinton era, we don't like to talk about Bill Clinton, but God, good luck was great, wasn't it? So less passage of laws might be a good thing. We'll get fewer of these stupid resolutions, fewer of these laws that essentially add more stuff to the books, create more scorekeeper problems. And so I would say, get rid of that second session and make it all about, make people like Duffy spend his time doing oversight. He'd be really good at it, really good at it. Next, we got to fix how government runs, right? We're going to nibble on the margins on pension reform. They're going to just adopt the pensions one. Maybe not even that, because now I guess the police and fire are saying, well, we don't want you to extend our years until we retire. Right? Because I think, believe what I've been told is the governor said, we're not touching the unions, that's the union, so we're going to give them what they want. So we're not going to touch pension reform. Just whatever it is they want to do, that's fine. Won't be enough. It'll kick the can for a couple of years, but you watch, we'll be right back here talking about the problem with our pensions in 10 years. Productivity. I don't know about you, my wife works at Cardinal Health. Anybody else work at Cardinal Health? You get access to YouTube, Facebook?
I'm not there.
No, you can't do that. You can't do it there. State government workers, bureaucrats, they can get on Facebook, ESPN, YouTube, you name it, all day, every day. That's not good for productivity, folks. Right? And you think, oh man, you're just throwing out rhetoric, red meat for the masses. Let me tell you, when I was a deputy director in an agency in Colorado for government owns, we actually did an audit of an entire union. And we monitored for 4 weeks the internet usage. Not just that, when they logged in and when they logged off. What we found out was the vast majority were not working a full day. And to our surprise, we thought it'd be like 15%, 20%. The average employee in that unit was spending 40% of their day on the internet on non-government websites. And this was in 2003, before Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, all these other things, right? 40%. And my favorite was the guy who was spending his time on RussianBrides.com and GreekBrides.com. We fired him. We did it the right way, because you have the unions protect them. So I walked him and I said, Aristotle, let's have a chat. You see that stack? It's 5 feet high. That stack is every single internet site you've been to over the last 4 weeks. You can take this through the system. You have every right in your job to do that. I will enter that into evidence and make sure that everybody knows those are the websites you've been going to. What would you like to do? You resign. That's the way you do it. Higher ed. We've got to reform higher ed. Costs too much in this stage. Did you see, the report came out, I think it was Forbes or Fortune, that 3 of Ohio universities, Ohio State, Miami, and OU, are among the most expensive public colleges in America. We cannot put that burden that's already killing Ohioans on the backs of moms and dads or students and expect us to have a thriving economy. We don't need more professors in Ohio State or Miami or any of these public college or universities. We need to leverage technology. If Harvard and MIT and Stanford can adopt technology and have a professor teach via video courses, why can't we do that here? I had that in a report I did on principles for fixing Ohio. We looked at it, right? Remember, there were 14 universities, public four-year colleges. All 14 have this roughly the exact same history course. 14 different professors are teaching it that we are paying for in their pensions. Why not figure out who's the best? Have that one teach all 14 across the state. Why not do that? We don't need more professors. We don't need more professors. So we need to bring down the cost of higher ed and do that by getting rid of all this overhead. Because every professor we add all this mass, guess what? That means we need more buildings, nicer buildings, blah, 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 and the cost is going up. Next, we need to have, this is one my wife calls this the restatement of the obvious. Who are the lawyers in the room? Who are the lawyers? Raise your hand. Yeah, like lawyers have a restatement of contracts, restatement of torts, restatement of this. My wife calls it restatement of the obvious. We actually need to lower taxes in our spending in Ohio. We got to bring it down. We can't keep having spending increase greater than inflation. There's no reason our state general revenue fund budget was $27 billion this year, it's $28 billion next year. It should be closer to $22 billion. Bottom line. When you do a population growth plus inflation since 1990, it should be about $22 billion. We got lots of fat. Nobody wants to say there's fat, but trust me, there's fat. Lots of fat we got to take under control. That fat isn't just in the state budget, it's in the local budget all over the place. And if we don't bring down the cost of spending, taxes cannot come down. Taxes don't come down, we cannot win in Ohio in a battle against the other states that have a lower tax burden. Just the bottom line. Bottom line. One of the things I've urged for 2.5 years now for the governor to do is not to try to jam through severance taxes, but to have a tax summit with state and local folks all sitting at the table. And if it takes 2 months, it takes 2 months. But it does us no good to take money here at the state level that then pops up the taxes at the local level. That's what the last budget did, right? Took $1 billion out of the local government fund, and now we're seeing all these taxes pop up over the place to replace those funds. Because those folks don't cut their spending. They never do, right? It does us no good. Let's not play shell games with the Huns anymore. We have one of the the sixth highest local tax burden in the entire country. It's not our state income tax that's the problem, folks. It's 35th, 36th. It's that local tax burden that drives us way down. So we've got to stop this game. Let's get everybody at the table and say, how do we bring the overall burden down on our islands? That's what matters. That's what matters. There's this idea, sounds foreign, I know, especially to this group. It's called federalism. You know, we've got to get back to a system based on our Constitution. Our founding fathers were some really brilliant men. No offense to the women, they just happened to be all men back then. Happened to be. You couldn't even vote men. Right? But they built an entirely beautiful system based on the principle of federalism, the 1910th Amendment. And the idea was, we had these 50, back then it was only 13, but eventually 50 laboratories of competition. Everyone says laboratories of democracy. Just so you know, Justice Brandon Asking wrote that was in the dissent. He meant it exactly opposite of how we all mean. He didn't mean federalism. He actually wanted centralization. He was arguing for more centralization. So I call them laboratories of competition. Because that's what, if you read the federal papers, that's what they wanted. They wanted the states to be able to compete against one another to create these healthy competition. No the interstate commerce stuff was supposed to drive down the tariffs, right? The arbitrary tax stuff on other states' goods and services. But they want us to essentially compete against each other. And I will say to you, you know, we spend all this time talking about Obamacare, farm bills, transmission bills. Why in God's name does Washington still drive the bus? I mean, again, we're stating the obvious. We don't need a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington, including our bureaucrats. I haven't seen John Boehner drop a bill that says, you know, how about we cut federal taxes for every dollar that funds Medicaid, and we let Ohio raise its state tax at a lower degree, that it's a net win for Ohioans, and let Ohio fund a Medicaid program it wants to have. And if Jerry Brown in California wants to give every freaking Californian healthcare coverage under Medicaid, let him. And they'll drive people into Ohio. We like that. But we don't need Washington to tell us how to take care of our sick and poor, how to run our schools, how to build our bridges, and take care of our roads. If Ohio and every other state kept its money here, none of this tax transfer garbage or block grants, that's the wrong debate. And that's what folks like Boehner and T-Berry talk about, or we need to have block grants. No, let's keep Ohio money in Ohio, and let's have our governor and our legislature design the programs that will fund directly. And I can tell you, if we cut taxes for those programs at the federal level and raise taxes in Ohio to cover it, the delta will be a net benefit to taxpayers, because you're getting anywhere between essentially 15 to 40% of the federal taxes goes to essentially bureaucratic overhead in Washington, and then the state bureaucracy that deals with the Washington bureaucracy. So all that goes away. That's a net for us. And we can then have a more robust competition among the states, because we're truly having more and more of our paychecks go to state sources, not the federal sources. And so where you live really does matter. Rather than today, that sort of what we pay really goes to the federal government. So where you live matters on the margins, property taxes, local taxes, but the big fight, right? The big amount of money goes to Washington. Let's keep the money here. There's no reason in today's day and age that that's not a better solution for Americans. Why? One, we have a problem in Washington called a deficit. And you're not going to fix that, right, unless you can drive down costs. Washington can't drive down costs. We can do it in the states. We don't need as much money to do it in the states. So let's keep our money and we'll do it here. We'll also have more accountability. Way more accountability. We know we don't have any accountability in Washington. We all know that. But boy, we get a lot of accountability in state government. We can get things done here. We can stop stuff here. So we have a choice. Let's have the fight here where it matters. And then finally, we got to have ideas of infrastructure funding. The reason why 100% of the proceeds from this book are going to the Reagan Library and the C3 network is because we conservatives always talk about ideas matter. But I got to tell you, I ran Buckeye for 2 years, and you guys have clutched your wallets. You don't fund ideas. They don't just happen. They don't grow on trees. Somebody's got to actually spend time to get paid to come up with those ideas. And if you don't have a C3 network doing that, then we leave legislators to their own devices, and that's never good. Because unlike Mike, a whole lot of them are not the smartest balls. They're not the folks we want coming up with the ideas of how to run government. But you let a conservative think tank, if they're funded, they come up with the agenda all over America, we'll get better ideas, better solutions, we'll get this country back on track. and will be, again, that shining city on the hill. Ohio will once again be an economic leader, not the economic laggard it has become. So let me take a couple minutes and we'll talk about what color is Ohio politically. There's a whole chapter in the book on this. You can get into the details of it because I know with the election a couple months away, this is kind of, everyone wants to think about it. Right now, Karl Rove, you must have read my book. He didn't. But, he was on Fox News and said, Obama's got 271 right now. And that's what I said 2 years ago. But I say it again in the book because electorally, Obama has the advantage right now. Going into the election, Obama's got a better chance of getting 270 than we do. So that's number one. Ohio. Here's what we're dealing with in Ohio. We have two distinct problems. We have a base problem that Paul Ryan may be curing. But when you go to the primary back in March here in Ohio, in the 69 counties that Rick Santorum won of the 88, Mitt Romney got fewer votes in those counties than Mike Huckabee did in 08 when it wasn't even a competitive primary. Think about that for a minute. Those are the red counties, right? That's a base problem. So the base is going to have to really show up. And you see that in polls. Right now the Democrats are getting about 85 to 90% of their base. We're at about 75% to 80. So our base isn't quite where it needs to be. Ryan may cure that, don't know. I'm not sure he's going to have a big impact on Ohio at the end of the day that Portland would have had, but that should sail. Let's hope he has the base influence. The other issue we have is we had a competitive primary in 2012. They had a competitive primary in 2008 in Ohio. In their primary, compared to our primary, they had 1.1 million more voters vote in their competitive primary 4 years ago than we did this year. Again, numbers problems. Numbers problems. We got to deal with that. And then I think, as Kevin said, I know JD, you said it, we did a poll about 2 weeks ago. It's on the Opportunity Ohio website. You can find it. And we have the crosstabs up there. Unlike all these other polling companies, we actually issued crosstabs. So look at the crosstabs. Those are the things where they take the question and they do it against all the various demographics. That's where the fascinating stuff is. Our problem right now, both for Mandel, Mandel has two problems. Romney has one. Romney's problem is independent women and men. That's where the target is. They're about 20% independent men and about 30% of independent women who are undecided still. Those are the ones who are going to decide Ohio. Bottom line. So we have a small base problem. My hope is that gets cured. But I got to tell you, if we cannot reach that 20% men independent vote, or 30% women independent vote, we ain't going to win the state. Now, Mandel has a secondary problem in that it doesn't matter demographic. The age 55 to 65, and age 65 and older voter, he's getting crushed by Brown. 20%, 30% deltas. He's getting crushed by it. And those are the folks who reliably vote. And I think what you're seeing there is they look to TV and they go, is that kid 12? He's not. That's why I think the commercial now you see age 34, because I think they know that seniors are looking at him going, how old is that guy? So we can't fix that, but we got to drive the debate about, I would argue with you, low taxes for both campaigns. Why? Well, we just saw the reason why. 82% of local levies failed this past week. 82%. That's Ohio saying, I don't want any higher taxes. So that is the single message I think that we can drive and say, they want higher taxes, we don't. Same issue that we should have argued for SB 5, but we didn't argue. We're looking at about 12 counties. 12 counties. 8 blue and 4 red. That's it. That's where Ohio's won or lost. The 4 red counties, Delaware, and then Claremont, Warren, and Butler. Those are it. If we can't get huge numbers there and so the margin of victory, make the margin of victory as big as we can in those 4 counties, and at the same time limit the margin of defeat in the 8 blue, Cuyahoga, Lucas, Lorraine, Mahoney, Trumbull, Franklin, Stark, Montgomery. Okay, Hamilton's not. Hamilton is weird. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's blue. They've all moved. Essentially all the reds moved, and there's not that much blue, so it's not, it can swing, but not that big. But those blue counties, That's where they can drive up huge numbers. Huge numbers. If you take their 8 and our 4 red, and if the candidates exit those 12 counties, the Democrats will be ahead. There's no doubt about it. They always are. But if their lead is more than 400,000 votes, game's over. The other 76 counties are totally irrelevant because there are not enough numbers in those counties to get the margins of victory to make up the 400,000. And trust me, I've looked at 14 years of polling of data, 47 races in all 88 counties. I've got a huge Mongo data crunching machine. I can tell you that 400,000 number is a pretty solid number. So our fight is in those 12 counties. Drive up our margin in the 4 red, drive down their margin in the 8 blue, so that we exit those counties with less than a 400,000 vote deficit that we then can make up in the remaining 74 counties. Okay, that's where the battle is. That's where the battle is. So if you're going to fight where the counties matter. God, I love Henry and I love Allen and Adams, but that's not where the votes are. Votes are in the big counties where the numbers are. So with that, I'll start taking questions from anybody for as long as you want. Again, books are free. Make sure you take one when you leave. Leave me your email so I can get you updated from time to time. Yes,
all right, if I may, just before we get into that. What we normally do is we'll pass around the microphone, give everybody a chance to ask a question. Then while your question is being answered, we'll move to the next one. We like to get as many questions in as possible. I will also tell you that we don't have, it's voluntary. We're going to pass the hat. Unfortunately, the room isn't free, and it is Dublin, so it's expensive. So whatever you can do, we sure would appreciate it.
Even though the city of Dublin has an 85% rainy day fund, the city of Dublin has enough money in their rainy day fund to fund almost an entire year of operations. And you will still not be getting a tax cut. They're going to build more roundabouts and build more art and charge us more for the room.
As we get started, I hope what you found, for those of you who've attended our series, is that it truly is our objective to engage, educate, and empower you. I hope when you leave, obviously Matt has outlined several solutions to the problems that face us. The thing I'm going to ask you to do when you leave today is that you reach out to a candidate. Pick one. Help them. They need the help to win. All right? We've got Mike Duffy, we've got Julie Hubler here tonight. Please reach out to them. Valoria Hoover, other candidates. I hope you will pick one and help them. It's absolutely essential. So with that.
Enjoyed all of your comments, Matt, and your book. I'm not finished with it, but I'm enjoying all of it.
There's $1,000 about it.
The workers' compensation program in Ohio is one of the biggest disadvantages to bringing employers into Ohio and keeping them here. Ohio is probably one of only 4 or 5 in the country that retain a state fund. It seems pretty straightforward. The privatization of the workers' comp program should be one of the first things very high on the list. What are your thoughts about the reticence in undertaking that, and what do you think the prospects are for addressing it?
Yeah, so, a little contrarian. When I talk to business owners, they rarely ever mention workers' comp, believe it or not. That's not to say it's not a problem. It absolutely is a problem. The reticence to tackle on is one, you got the union issue. 2, you got the trial lawyers issue. That's always a huge impediment, right? But privatization, I'm a fan of it, but it's got to be thoughtful, right? I think we can actually do more to fix the system if we focused on the amount of fraud that's going on between the doctors and the lawyers in the system, right? Where you've got doctors whose entire practice is workers' comp practices, lawyers, and the lawyers know which doctors to send their client to get the great, oh, well, this person's, they're not partial, they're full, all that fun stuff, right? So there's this massive system that needs to be fixed in order to get what is considered honesty in the system. That would drive rates down because we have too many people who can work who are not working. That's not just a workers' comp issue. We see that also. I think the number is about 38% of members of the police and fire pension are on disability, and the vast majority is for mental disability. And when I Bill Estabrook, and he kind of intimates, look at that. I mean, that tells me, right, that there's some things that we need to do to make the system more honest. Graduate.
Yeah, Matt, since I'm a workers' compensation defense attorney for 26 years, I feel compelled to kind of reply to that. When Honda chose Indiana over Marysville, Ohio to put their second plant, one of the top 3 reasons they cited was Ohio's workers' compensation system. In Indiana, there's this just like insurance system. Ohio has one of the worst, and I actually spoke to Governor Casey face-to-face about workers' compensation system in Ohio. A lot of it sounds great, but the statute itself says, when in doubt, it's to be construed in favor of the workers, the injured workers. So we need to tackle from going back to the basics, like House representatives, to say, do we really want second-tier welfare system as a workers' compensation system? Right now it is, well, they try for workers' comp, if that doesn't work, they go to Social Security, Disability, and then welfare in that order.
Right.
So we need to have a fundamental cultural change, and with respect to defend the attorneys, it really is, the system is really set up so that we used to joke, and my husband and I, we do defense, we go to bed at night, and then every night, workers' compensation, the trial lawyers, they file a claim. So we wake up, then we've done more work, they create more work. The system is really out of control. So
yeah,
we need to start writing to Representative Duffy and say we need to change the system.
And Julie's right. I mean, what was it? I'm going to watch this, but last month was the first month in American history when there are more people on disability than working.
It's a welfare system.
That's crazy. No, that's not right. More people on disability than unemployed. Yeah, that's the number. It's not 110.
Thank you, Matt. Great facts. Hard to disagree. I think one of the things, the comments that I have is facts. We always find facts and truths are really on our side. Still, continuously, we are having to battle, against what? I think 2 things. Primarily, there are many, but 2. One being a huge propaganda that they have mastered over decades. And the other thing is the fraud. That those things. Speaking of propaganda, I mean, the other day, I think yesterday or the day before, I heard one of the liberal hosts was talking to Howard Dean and asking him, Republicans are accusing that $720-some billion is taken out of Medicare. And his response was, yes, but do you think people are going to believe it? I mean, the point that he was making is, it's going to be so hard for conservatives to make that, to educate people, that's really is what is happening.
Right.
So that's an example. I mean, there are many, and I think in the mainstream media, that's also, I think earlier you were saying that.
Giants, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, your overall point is exactly right. Our side is really good about spouting facts and figures, and that doesn't move people. People are moved by emotion. They're moved by the little girl pulled out of the fire and whose great grandma is sitting there in the commercial, right? That we can't compete with that. We can, but we don't, right? We don't tell stories. They do. And if you remember, who's the most successful Republican in the last 50 years in America? Reagan told stories, right? He told great stories, and he didn't talk about marginal tax rates, and he did, but he didn't talk about, hey, we need to get in and fix workers' comp, right? What he talked about was evil empires and the city on a hill. And he made us want to be about something at an emotional level, and that's what moved the country. But we spent all of our time often saying, if they just knew the facts, we'd win. We won't. If we can't put those facts in a compelling story that moves them. And that's hard to do, because the other side, they don't care about the facts and figures. They are purely on the emotional level. So we have to try to figure out a way to tell our story, and we do that by personalizing the story. So for example, if you go to the Opportunity Ohio website, there's a video on there, and you're going to see more of that guy. His name's Jared James. He's a small business energy entrepreneur at Marietta. And Jared's been doing stuff for 20 years, and he's essentially the #1 guy trying to stop the severance tax that the government's trying to push. And if you watch, Jerry tells a story. Been doing this for 20 years, trying to save my city Marietta that's been down in the dumps. Right? And if you take my margin from 7% down to 4%, I'm not going to have the ability to keep more employees. I'm going to probably have to move back. If I move back, it means I'm not going to buy as many computers. Maybe I won't buy a cup of coffee as often as I do. Maybe I'll not buy a new car every 2 years. I'll do it every 4. And every single ripple that has in Marietta means that auto dealer then sells fewer cars, the coffee barista sells fewer coffee, the computer store sells, and there's a ripple effect. All because they wouldn't want to take his margins from 7% starting thin down to a thinner 4%, so that we can spread around a small little tax cut for other people. It's not what we do. We should be defending Jerry, even when it's our guy who's attacking. We got to tell stories. Now that was far more compelling to you than me just giving you facts and figures. Why?
Yep. But you know, that's just, how many sales guys in here? Who sells for a living? I mean, that's basic sales, isn't it? It's emotion. That's what gets people going.
Yeah.
Right. I think every Republican should read Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, look at you go, Randian. I love it. It's a great book. You know, it's the second most popular book. Everyone's Bible.
Machiavelli.
You know what else book? So we were down to Hilton Head last week with every other Ohioan, and we had our Scarlet van like every other Ohioan, and we did the whole Hilton Head thing. But I have 3 kids, as you guys have heard me talk about in the past. But every once in a while, when the 2 girls aren't fighting, they're actually in the pool or on the beach, and the little guy's sleeping, I actually get time to read. So I read a book called True Believers. Anybody hear this book? The older folk probably did. Eric Hofer. It was written in 1953. I would urge you to read that book, because that book is all about how these mass movements that happened right after Nazi Germany, but it talks about how these mass movements happen, how these fanatics get in power. And it is when I was reading this, I was literally going, oh my goodness, this is like, it was eerie, some of the things that were in that book that fit today's day and age, and the left and some of the things that they're trying to do, where they're trying to take this country. So that's another book I would add, is Eric Hofer's True Believers.
What do you think of Machiavelli?
Machiavelli is great, but I think again, we can bring it up, but I would rather say if you're going to read a book, I'd rather they read Atlas Shrugged.
Well, you've got to combine it.
I know, but that's 1,100 pages on its own. People don't read those kind of big books. There's no pictures. What, her speech on atheism is 50 pages long. I mean, my goodness.
They won't watch a 5-minute
So
video.
if we can get through Atlas Shrugged, that's a huge win just to start off with.
What are your thoughts on real legislation for open records? I found the state of Ohio is totally inaccessible. And with that brings corruption, overpayment, everything. And most people don't know there are laws on the books, but it's totally not enforced.
This is I amen. I got to tell you, state government is opaque. They don't respect the open records law. Local governments are way worse. Higher ed is even worse.
Yes.
Poor Mary spent way too much time trying to navigate the bowels of all levels of government just to get salary data so we can put it on the website. And you'd think this stuff would be easily accessible, and it never is. And both sides are guilty. The Dems are when they're in charge, and the R's are when they're in charge. Nobody wants to give up the information. And here's another problem, and I talk about this in the book a little bit. The amount of time the political appointees of both parties spend on personal email, doing state work or doing political work on state time is getting out of hand. Where you've got folks who are high-level political appointees walking around state offices with an iPad and they have no state email. You figure out how they're doing their job. Right? That's the kind of funny business that's got to stop. Got to stop.
Yeah, Matt.
Now this is Mark's annual telling what I got wrong. Not exactly question. Go ahead, Mark.
No, we don't have time for that. It's not that Ohio hasn't tried, right? 2005, there was some pretty comprehensive tax reform 21% decrease in the income tax, the elimination of tangible personal property. Did these things just not work? Were they the wrong steps, or?
Yeah, no, those work, but those are all, again, focused on that state level tax burden, right? And our state level tax burden isn't the problem in Ohio. It's a problem, but when the state income tax is the 35th highest in the country, that's not what's keeping people from coming or going, right? It's the local burden.
The tangible personal property tax was one.
Yeah, but that's a small sliver, right, compared to the broader taxes that are being hit for the statewide stuff. And so for us, if we can bring down the property taxes, get them down, and you're not going to get them down, as you know, unless you tackle compensation packages, because it's where 80 to 90 to 95% of things go. But that's the burden we got to fix, and we're actually not making it better. I mean, the local government fund pullout that the governor did, married with the getting rid of the estate tax, which I support, but that creates arguments for local folks to say we got to replace those funds. They don't cut government; they just replace the funds and trying to get levies, whether it's through emergency. And some of these, you're on the school board, but counties, I just saw in Marion, they just hike taxes by vote of the commissioners. There you go. That's the way it happens.
Yeah, too true. The other question I had is, can you point to another state that has done the types of things that you're advocating as their model problem?
So some of them I think have happened in some form or fashion in some of the states, right? So Rhode Island passed meaningful pension reform, which was, by the way, all the Democrats did. It wasn't Republicans, it was Democrats did, led by their, I think it was their Attorney General. Michigan, 15 years ago, moved all state workers from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. So the stuff has been happening. We're just always last to get there, or we don't get there. But that's the whole point, I think, Mark, is even if the answer is no, nobody's done this stuff. That's the exact reason why we should. Because what ends up happening, this is what happens. Tort reform is a great example, right, Julie?
Right.
Ohio passed tort reform after everybody else already did. So once we pass it, they're now moving to a different, even further down the road. And so we're on this perpetual, always behind everybody else. Not everybody, but the ones that are ahead of us, we're always behind. So for once, if we actually get aggressive and do these big things, we'll get to the front of the line, they'll be following us, and we'll be more competitive. That's it? Yeah?
Do we get them started? Who do we go to first to get this started? I mean, we can talk to our local representative, and he's not going to do anything, or she's not going to do anything.
You're right. Great question. In the book, after each of my reform solutions, I say action item. Well, how are we going to do this? A lot of them are going to be ballot initiatives. One by one, we got to get these things on the ballot, because you're right, the legislature is never going to put in a system that takes them out of power. We know that, right? Heck, they're going to probably try to get rid of some of the term limits or extend the terms, because God forbid, right, they get their work done in the reasonable time we've given them, right? But I have, after each solution, I have in the book, here's the action item, how we're going to get this done. Thanks. Read the book, yeah, read the book.
Can you tell me what you have learned that has happened in Ohio about having integrity of workers, leaving a positive legacy as a member of the family, and what it means to work hard?
3 really big questions. So let's take them one at a time.
I'm not talking about approach.
Approach?
Individuals' approach to their life.
Yeah, so, I think if you look at the big picture, America and Americans have always succeeded when we've first focused on our families, and then our neighborhoods, and then our communities, right? And God love all of you, but every one of you is all focused on Obamacare or Barack Obama right now. And I will tell you, it ain't going to matter a difference who wins that election in November if at some point we don't start focusing first on our families, then on our neighborhoods, then on our communities, then on our cities and our counties and our states. Because we got to fix things first in our own backyard before we worry about what's going on way out in Washington, right? We've got to live lives of integrity. where we don't have politicians who say one thing but do another, right? Who preach the gospel and then are off with some hooker in a hotel room or involved with drugs and alcohol, all the kinds of things, the stories we read about, right? And so I think when you figure out and say to yourself, we're going to focus first on our own backyard and move out from there, I think we will see massive amounts of improvement in our own communities and our own state that will then lead a national tidal wave. But we got to stop worrying about Washington so much and worry about here first.
Are you thinking about it doesn't take a village to raise a child, it takes a family?
It takes a family. I mean, Hillary's a great target. But step back from it, right? It's an African proverb. And, her version of it is, right, government takes care of it. Right? But it's not what the African proverb really is about, right? What it's about is when the power went out and we're down, that I can call my neighbor and say, oh, Amy, can you get into our house and turn off the sprinklers because they're going to be all whacked now and I don't want to, and she helps out, right? Or that's what it's really about. And what happened from 1965 on in America is we put government, and mostly the federal government, in bigger and bigger parts of our lives. And we pushed out churches and faith-based organizations. We pushed out NGOs, community groups that were locally funded, locally run. And you shouldn't be surprised when you think about why, whether it's a healthcare service provider or it's an education service provider or, name any type of county service that's a nonprofit, the community's not their client. Their client is Head Start program or some other Washington program that they apply every year for a grant. That's who they care about pleasing. Not some poor young kid who was born of a mother at 17 years old without a high school degree, who has men that are abusive in her life, who never learned how to be a parent herself. That poor kid doesn't stand a chance because no one sees him as the client. And we've got to get government back out and get the community back in if we want to have a true turnaround where it really matters. I mean, we spend a lot of time on the right talking about school choice and vouchers, and I'm supporters of that. But don't think for a moment that if we don't figure out how in a non-governmental way to fix what happens in the lives of countless young urban youth kids from 4 p.m. to 8 a.m., I don't care what you give to them from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., you're not stopping the systemic problems in their lives. And no government program has ever solved that problem, and it won't. We got to get the community back in and get government out if we want to solve those problems.
Will the masses let us do that?
Well, we have to become the masses. I mean, this is why I focus so much on federalism. Because I truly believe if you're a liberal progressive and you think government should be doing lots of things, you should like federalism too. Because if by giving more money to John Kasich or Ted Strickland, giving more money to them, right? Less money goes to Washington, more money goes to them. We all pay lower taxes because of that, getting rid of the bureaucracy, right? They'll be able to put more money into healthcare providers, more money into education, more money into bridges and roads. So they'll actually invest more. So if you are that liberal progressive healthcare provider, you're going to like federalism too. So we've got to make sure, again, we tell the right story to say, we all win on this. No one that loses are a bunch of Washington bureaucrats that live in DC who get on that train at 4 o'clock, that train that we pay for with transportation voucher, and they ride MARTA out down to Maryland, they ride the VRE out to Virginia, or the ones that live in DC. You can sit there, I'm there at Heritage, 4 o'clock. Boom, man, you see the exodus of federal employees out at 4 o'clock. I don't care what happens to them. We got to do is get it back here. Keep the money and the power here and in every other state. We'll fix America.
I have to go back to what Julie said about the culture and the situation in our culture. I think the problem began to derive when we lost sense of personal integrity and put emphasis on money. And when this happens, and you repeated that several times, money is the driver in so many circumstances. And why was Reagan so successful? Because he was able to harken back to a deeper value that was fundamental to what the culture really held dear. You know, when you go to the other side, and money is the preeminent driver and concern, you lose the other side, which was personal integrity, caring, giving, and all these kinds of concerns that are more human. So Julie hit it right on the head. You know, unless our culture, you know, pulls itself together and looks at itself in the mirror, we are going to be lost.
You know, look, we are standing on razor's edge. Right? We really are. I mean, all the politicians love to say, this is the most important election of our lives. And they're right for once. But they're right because even after we elected them last time, they didn't fix the problem. Right? So they keep failing to fix it, which makes every election the most important election of our lifetime. Right? But we are standing on that edge. And we are about at the point where Alexander Tytler, a Scottish philosopher, studied government, studied history, and said, you know, the average age of democracy is about 200 years. In about 200 years, it falls apart. And it's called the cycle of democracy that you've all heard of, right? And we are in that point where, in the cycle of democracy, we are in the dependency phase. When 50% of Americans receive a transfer payment from government, when a majority of Americans don't pay federal taxes, the dependency culture is growing and booming. You can only put so much on the backs and burdens of producers, Randian, before they say, enough, enough. And look what's happening in France. They're going to jack taxes up to 75% marginal on the rich people. Guess where they're going to go? Germany. Right? They're leaving France. And so
they're going to Belgium and Great Britain.
And probably Switzerland. But look, we are standing on that edge. And we've got to make a decision. Are we going to be a dependency culture or not? Because it is an inevitable slide if we cannot unring the bell. And I can tell you there's no historical precedence when any country has been able to unring the bell and say to the person who no longer pays the taxes or who receives the transfer payment, you're going to have to pay taxes, you're going to have skin in the game for us. That's never happened. If we don't do it now, it will not happen, and it won't be 5 years or 10, it may be 500 years. Rome was about 500 to 700 years in its decline. But America, as we know it, we'll look back at this point in time and say that's when the slide began. Right? So we've got a true turning point decision to make. Do we want to be a dependency culture, or do we want to get back to our founding principles on individual responsibility, liberty, right? Low taxation?
It's a friend of mine lives in West Virginia. I'm going to tell you a story. Okay?
You know, I just drove to West Virginia. I got to tell you, is there a part of that state that doesn't have freaking trees on it? Because I'm driving through that thing on 77 going, oh my God, there is no, are there suburbs in that state? Anyway, go ahead.
A visitor, okay? A friend of mine lives in a depressed area, okay?
Sure, yeah.
Over 60% of the people in his region, in his county, are on welfare, okay? They're totally supported by the government.
Yeah,
they get a little plastic card that gets automatically charged every 2 weeks or something with thousands of dollars, and they have 3 or 4 kids.
Yep.
And that's their entire lifestyle.
Yep.
Okay? How do you impress upon them, or is it ever going to be important to them that we save the country?
Here's how, right? We've got to give them an opportunity. The best way for prosperity in America and to get people off is a job. And West Virginia is losing jobs because they're under attack in the coal industry. And we've got to say to them, don't tell me any person wouldn't, if given the choice, say, I'd rather earn a hard day's pay with a decent job. Right? A decent job. Not some job that is paying subsistence wages because they're competing against illegal labor and all that kind of stuff, right? Go ahead.
One of the ladies, and I'm using that loosely, was offered a job that paid the same amount that she was getting on welfare, or just slightly under it.
I understand.
She didn't have enough pride to take the job. She told her daughter, we need to keep this, and taught her daughter to do the same thing.
And that's what we're talking about, that systemic poverty problem, right? We got to break that cycle. You don't break that cycle in one generation.
How do you teach?
We got to keep the kids in school. We got to make sure those schools are performing so that a kid has a chance to go to college or a trade school and learn a skill so that they realize what my mom said was wrong. Right? That's piece number one. Piece number two is, look, Robert Byrd, right, was the king of West Virginia. He wanted independence. If you realize, if you live in West Virginia and you work for the federal government, you know how much you get paid? You get paid the DC premium. You get paid as if you live in Washington, and the housing costs of Washington. Because Byrd made sure that West Virginia was included in the DC premium. So if you were to get a job in the federal government from Columbus, you moved to Washington, you get probably a 14 or 18% pay hike compared to other federal workers in that pay grade across the country because you're living in DC. Byrd made sure of that. That man probably did more harm to that state by creating a greater dependency culture. So it's not you can't convince one person. It's a generational battle we've got to fight, because if we don't fight it, whether it's in West Virginia or it's in Columbus, there's no way we're going to turn the ship. Because there are going to be more of them than there are of us as time wears on.
But it takes 3 generations and the election's still bounce.
I understand that, right? That's why I'm saying, if you focus on presidential elections, you're never going to be satisfied, because they will not fix it. It's got to be fixed at the local level, at the state level, not in Washington.
But it's not going to get fixed if Obama gets reelected either.
It's not going to get fixed until governors fight the fight that they should be fighting. I don't understand why John Kasich isn't fighting aggressively against Washington on Medicaid, transportation, education, saying enough of this, and he doesn't spend his time getting the other governors, Democrat and Republican, fighting that fight. If every governor said, damn it, Washington, get out of our pocket, we want to keep our money, control these programs, and John Boehner's our House Speaker, he's the Speaker of the House in Cincinnati. Why can't he lead this fight with John Kasich to get Washington off our backs, get the money here so that we have control, so that people like Mike Duffy can do the things here, and if Mike screws up, we'll hold him accountable. That's what's got to happen, is the governor's got to fight the fight. But these governors have spent too much time doing this instead of this. I want a governor that's going to do this.
So you think we can fix it if Obama gets elected?
I don't care who gets elected. I think we can fix it if the governors stop going like this and go like this. That's the only thing that's going to solve it. Because no Republican is going to do what needs to be done unless the governors force them to. George Bush didn't.
Did Kasich do that on Medicare?
No, not at all. I mean, he's nibbling on this thing, I don't know what we're going to do, maybe we'll take it, maybe we won't. I mean, I'm not talking about a micro-level fight about one part of the program. I'm saying fight the big national fight. Tell the story. Tell the story about how it's swallowing the state budget. That if he can't control the money, all the money that Ohioans pay for Medicaid, he can't fix that problem, and it's going to kill our state budget. Have him join the other governors, Republican Democrats, to fight that battle. These House members and Senate members that go to Washington are our people, are they not?
Right.
Why is John Boehner not fighting this fight on our behalf?
He's playing golf.
I mean, we've got to fight the right fight. We don't ever fight the right fight. The right fight is to get our governors fighting to keep the money and the power. That's the bottom line. They'll never give it up.
Absolutely. Has our speaker done a great job here tonight?